Are we going to have a 21st century that's an American century or a Chinese century? So I think about the goals that this administration has stated. They've talked about American manufacturing, and I hear it from both sides. We must have American manufacturing. How are you going to have American manufacturing if you don't produce some of the minerals and the metals that come out of the ground? How are you going to have American manufacturing if we don't produce some of that in America? I hear that this administration wants to make sure that there's union labor. There's a project labor agreement that is in place to be able to build this mine. This is going to create union jobs, one of the goals of this administration. And certainly they've talked about electrification. We want to electrify our vehicle fleet, as well as getting rid of natural gas-fired stoves. How are you going to get there if you don't have the minerals that produce those devices that are going to be able to provide that?
I just heard that Republicans now support a clean energy transition. I hope people clip that, because that is wonderful, wonderful news. So I want to be the first to welcome you to the Clean Energy Transition Club, where we are going to support investments for states, municipalities, and tribal governments to purchase clean energy technology like solar panels, electric vehicle charging infrastructure, wind turbines, all of which, until today apparently, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle opposed.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 3195, the Superior National Forest Restoration Act of 2024. The district I am proud to represent, Minnesota's 8th Congressional District, is blessed with an abundance of mineral wealth that would allow America to lead in the 21st century. The deposits in northern Minnesota could provide enough copper for over 70 million electric vehicles and nickel for 3.5 million battery packs. The Duluth Complex and its abundant resources lies under the Superior National Forest and throughout the Iron Range. The Superior National Forest is a working industrial forest where timber harvesting and mining are desirable activities. Regrettably, in January 2022, the Biden administration caved to radical anti-jobs, anti-mining activists by canceling 2 decades-old mineral leases held by Twin Metals Minnesota in the Superior National Forest. At the same time, the Biden administration began the withdrawal process on nearly 250,000 acres of land in the region. They are disregarding years of environmental review, a pending mine plan of operation, and an abundance of support from union workers, local residents, schools, builders, and miners. In doing this, President Biden has made his real position on mining known. He would rather rely on foreign adversaries like Communist China instead of union workers who stand ready to deliver Minnesota's mineral wealth under the strongest environmental and labor standards in the world.
Mr. Speaker, welcome back to the show. Unlimited drilling and extinction of wildlife, brought to you by the GOP, a subsidiary of Big Oil. This week's target, the Boundary Waters in northeastern Minnesota, a pristine wilderness that is in fact the most visited designated wilderness area in our country. And it's the most visited for a good reason. Its beautiful landscapes, crystal clear waters, and abundant wildlife make it a haven for outdoor recreation. The Boundary Waters support a thriving outdoor recreation economy with hundreds of thousands of annual visitors and tens of thousands of jobs across northeastern Minnesota. In fact, the Boundary Waters is so popular that an overwhelming majority of Minnesota voters oppose building new mines near this federally protected wilderness. But this region and its resources, our resources, have been under threat for years and are being threatened again today. In 1966, the Bureau of Land Management issued 2 mineral leases covering 5,000 acres of the Superior National Forest just outside of the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. There was never mining on either lease. Never mining. Yet they were renewed in 1989 and again in 2004. In 2012, Twin Metals Minnesota, a wholly owned subsidiary of a Chilean mining company, requested another extension of those two expired leases on Forest Service land in the Boundary Waters watershed to build a sulfide ore copper mine. In 2016, after an extensive environmental review process, which included public input and scientific analysis, the Forest Service concluded that sulfide ore copper mining, which is significantly different from the taconite mining that the region is used to, could result in, and I quote, extreme and serious and irreparable harm in the watershed of this wilderness area. The watershed there flows north, meaning it would flow past the mine and into our protected wilderness. The Forest Service found that any spills, leaks, or pollution would be all but impossible to contain, putting the entire ecosystem and watershed at risk. This should have been the answer: no to this sulfide ore copper mine. Because that's what the scientists say, that's what the community wants, and that is what the law means, that a wilderness area is protected from severe harm. But foreign companies wanting to mine and the politicians who answer to them were too enticed. As soon as President Trump came into office, his administration ignored the science and community input and reinstated Twin Metals leases. The Department of Interior solicitor under the current administration found that President Trump improperly renewed those leases. Thankfully, after another thorough review and rounds of community input and tribal consultation, the Biden administration finalized 20-year protections for 225,000 acres around the wilderness area, making that area ineligible for mining. But this bill seeks to undo all of that. This bill would mandate the withdrawal be overturned and the leases be reinstated and no judicial review allowed. This means that it will not matter if the water and air become poisoned and the surrounding tribes and communities become severely ill. No one will be able to take those concerns to a judge and ask that they revisit the decision to mine in the Boundary Waters. You'll hear today that Americans have to choose between mining for minerals to secure our clean energy future or protecting the health of our families and vulnerable ecosystems. That is simply not the case. We all understand the need for mining as part of our clean energy future. But America is already a top producer of copper and is already invested in a circular economy with our trusted trading partners for cobalt and for nickel. So if we're going to build a sustainable, enduring, modern mining industry, we have to do that while respecting sound science and community input, including tribal consultation. Look, I deeply respect the workers and their families who mine, and the way that that tradition has contributed to the backbone of industrial America. But they live and work in locations where mining is appropriate, where there is minimal to no harm to the environment or human health. Unfortunately, this bill disregards all of that and seeks to destroy now and deal with the ramifications, not later, not at all. I oppose this legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Let us be very clear about what this bill actually does. This bill does not reduce any environmental protections. It simply tells the Secretary of the Interior to do her job and complete the necessary environmental and regulatory reviews. Apparently, President Biden and congressional Democrats are so opposed to mining here in America that they won't even allow a company to prove that they can mine in an environmentally safe way. By opposing this bill, Democrats are allowing mines with unregulated labor practices and environmental standards to control the critical minerals market. Republicans are for American jobs, economic security, supply chain security, and protecting the environment by mining here in the United States, where we have more environmental protections than anywhere else in the world.
We are hearing a lot about America and America's mineral supplies. But what we're not hearing about is the truth about Antofagasta, the Chilean mining company who is pursuing these leases. At Antofagasta's mines in South America, the minerals are shipped to China for refining and smelting and then sold on the global market. I have seen no evidence, because there is no evidence, that Antofagasta won't do the exact same thing here, extracting our publicly owned minerals from pristine wilderness, paying no royalty for them, and then selling them abroad, leaving Americans with all of the mess and no benefit. So much for America first. I also want to talk about the environmental effects of this mining. Sulfide ore copper mining, that's what we're talking about. Not iron mining, not taconite iron mining, sulfide ore copper mining. That's what's being proposed outside of the Boundary Waters Wilderness area. And that sulfide ore copper mining poses a unique threat. It is different than taconite iron ore mining. What happens in sulfide ore copper mining is the ore that contains the ore that's extracted contains metals that are bound together with sulfur. When exposed to air and water, this sulfide-bearing ore discharges acid mine drainage into the ground and surface water. The waste rocks, the tailings from this mine would generate acid mine drainage for hundreds of years, at least. And just so everyone knows, these facts aren't hyperbole. This is available information studied and reported by scientists, with some who have published their findings on the dangers of sulfide ore copper mining at universities, including the University of Minnesota. Proponents of this mine say that their tailing facilities would be safe from leakage. We hear that every time about every environmental extraction proposal. But the facts are clear here. The Forest Service found that 100% of sulfide ore copper mines in the United States experienced pipeline spills or accidental releases. All of them. So it is a near certainty that that is what will happen, that we will have a pipeline spill, we will have an accidental release, we will have irreparable, severe environmental damage if this sulfide ore copper mine is allowed to occur on this Forest Service land. It would infect and pollute the boundary waters, and we would be unable to reclaim our beautiful, pristine wilderness.
This is going to create union jobs, one of the goals of this administration. And certainly they've talked about electrification. We want to electrify our vehicle fleet, as well as getting rid of natural gas-fired stoves. How are you going to get there if you don't have the minerals that produce those devices that are going to be able to provide that? Because remember, in every Toyota Prius, there's 60 pounds of copper. 60 pounds of copper. How are you going to electrify the vehicle fleet without producing minerals right here in America? And I think back to January 20th of 2021 and the very first action that this administration took in saying they're going to shut down Keystone XL, making it very clear we're going to be energy dependent once again. What immediately happened to the price of oil? It went from $60 a barrel. Within a couple months, it was up to $100 a barrel, enriching the despot, Vladimir Putin, who has used it to wage war in Eastern Europe. That's what happens when we do not utilize our natural resources, whether it's our forest resources, our mineral resources, or our oil and natural gas resources. We end up being dependent on other countries.
So as the newest members of the Clean Energy Transition Club, I want to give my colleagues on the other side of the aisle a brief lesson on where the U.S. stands with mineral production and trade, which is needed for the construction of clean energy technology, as my colleagues have correctly pointed out. First, the United States is among the top 5 producers of copper in the world, and according to the U.S. Geological Survey, has a low disruption potential. Second, while we do not in the United States have a significant amount of nickel or cobalt, we do have close trading relationships with our allies who do. Those allies are Canada, which is a leading supply of nickel, Norway, Japan, and Finland. But let's talk about what twin mine metals would produce. If this project by this Chilean-owned mining company was allowed to go forward, mine and pollute our wilderness, ship the ore and the jobs to China, and sell it anywhere around the world, what would it complete? Even if they were to sell all of it to us, and there is no guarantee they would choose to sell any of it here in the United States, it would produce about 1.5% of cobalt, about 2.3% of copper, about 3.6% of nickel, according to 2019 annual consumptions, the most recent figures I could find. So I want to emphasize, there is no guarantee that the minerals produced at this proposed twin metal mine would wind up back here in the United States. But do you know what we absolutely are guaranteed to end up with? Pollution, contamination, the destruction of beloved wilderness lands. That's what's at stake here. I also want to emphasize that the bill, H.R. 3195, would undo the withdrawal of 225,000 acres in the Superior National Forest. And what that would do is, in removing these lands from the protection from mining, what it would do is violate the will of indigenous communities. In this case, the Boundary Waters and Superior National Forest are traditionally known as the Anishinaabe land. The Ojibwe or Chippewa people have occupied this area since 1000 CE. The region's interconnected waterways have been used as critical trade routes for thousands of years. By the 1830s, the United States government began forcibly removing indigenous people from their lands in the upper Midwest. In exchange for millions of acres of land, the government promised to pay the Ojibwe people $35,000 each year for 20 years. And the tribes were also granted the right to hunt, fish, and gather on those ceded lands. In 1848, copper was discovered along the north shore of Lake Superior. Mining companies pressured the government to open the land to mining, which required another land cession, including what would become the Boundary Waters Wilderness Area. So the tribes had to sue. In 1985 and 1989, they won confirmation of the tribe's right to hunt, fish, and gather on those ceded lands, something that had been previously denied. To further protect these treaty rights, the Minnesota Chippewa tribe supported the administration's withdrawal, and they support my colleague, Representative McCollum's bill to permanently protect this region from mining. Because of their support for permanent protections, the tribe has faced boycotts from mining-aligned interest groups who have boycotted their casinos, event venues, and restaurants. That is a ridiculous and cruel response to a tribe that is simply trying to protect its ancestral lands and waters from toxic pollution. To add insult to injury, this bill restricts judicial review of the reinstatement of leases, a blatant attack on treaty rights. The U.S. government deciding on permits without allowing the tribes to address their concerns in court is an egregious overreach of legislation in general, but also of particular concern to tribal governments who would be directly affected but unable to address their concerns in the only legal means that they currently have. Mr. Speaker, I would like unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter from the Minnesota Chippewa tribe in support of permanent protection
Without
for the boundary
objection.
waters.
Mr. Speaker, my colleague just referenced a study that was not peer-reviewed. It was the Harvard study she brought forward that was not peer-reviewed. And I would like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins.
I want to start by noting that the Harvard study was, in fact, peer-reviewed. And as a former professor, I am very familiar with the peer review process. It is a reliable study, and what it shows is that what is best for the economy of this region is to protect these public lands and waters. Let me ask, what is the value of clean water? Water is also a valuable resource. It is also a resource in scarce supply around the country. If this bill moves forward, it would allow for the irreversible pollution of this pristine and incredibly valuable landscape. Remember, the Forest Service concluded after scientific study that there is a virtual certainty of severe and irreparable economic harm. All 100% of the sulfide ore copper mines in this country have had leakages and environmental contamination. That is what will happen here. This will mean the decimation of local economies that depend on visitation. This is the most visited wilderness area in our country. It belongs to the people of the United States. It does not belong and should not belong to a Chilean mining company which under our outdated mining laws will pay no royalty at all to the American people. If the U.S. wants to reduce our demand for copper, which is increasing, then we should invest in recycling, in reuse, in manufacturing improvements. That would create jobs domestically and not risk special places like the Boundary Waters. When this water, if this mine proceeds, and if this water is contaminated and destroyed, there is no known remediation strategy. It cannot be undone. The U.S. Forest Service has conducted an environmental review. They have consulted with communities, they have consulted with tribal members, and they have relied on cutting-edge science, and they have concluded that these mines should not go forward. The science is done here. It just doesn't line up with the answer of my colleagues' donors. I reserve the balance of my time.
Mr. Chair, I want to reiterate the fact to the American people. There will be no mining in the Boundary Waters, and there will be no mining in the buffer zone around the Boundary Waters. That was settled in 1978.
The Boundary Waters are not a bathtub. The water flows from one place into the other. And in this case, the watershed flows north, meaning it would flow past the mine and into the protected wilderness. My colleague on the other side of the aisle says there would be no mining in the Boundary Waters, but there would be waste, there would be pollution in those waters because of the watershed. This is exactly why we should rely on the scientific process and the conclusion of the Forest Service that this mining would cause severe and irreparable harm. I have heard no rebuttal from the other side of the aisle to the fact that every sulfide ore copper mine in our country has, 100% of them, had leakages and environmental harm.
The gentlelady is recognized to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have been having hearings, markups, and floor votes on this issue for years. Administrations have canceled and reinstated these leases and then canceled them again. The Biden administration, unlike the previous administration, took the time and effort to do the process right. And they came to the considered decision based on science to cancel the wrongly reinstated leases and to protect the Boundary Waters region for the next 20 years. That decision is not just based on sound science. It also is based on community input, robust tribal consultation, and at the end of the day, on the best interests of the American people, because that is who these public lands belong to. That is who should benefit from these public lands. But a foreign company and politicians who bend to their interests don't like it. And as they've made clear in this Congress, their priority is not putting science first or protecting communities. Their priority is putting corporate polluters' profits above all else by any means necessary. My Republican colleagues say that the toxic mining industry needs certainty. Well, this is certainty. The Boundary Waters watershed is off limits. I welcome the opportunity to work across the aisle to reform the mining law. For example, to require royalty payments. That way we can build a sustainable future for the industry. But that part of the conversation, support of mining, needs to recognize that some places are too special and too risky, and some types of mining are too risky to do. Because at the end of the day, who would you choose? Your child's health? Our lands? Wilderness? Endangered species? Tourism jobs? Our local economy? Or would you choose a foreign company who wants to mine in a location that would hurt the environment, our economy, and our health? I know what I would choose. I urge opposition to this bill, and I yield back.